All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most famous trials in all of history, and it wasn't for a crime of action, but for a crime of thought. This is Plato's Apology, the incredible story of how Socrates defended his very way of life, right up to his death sentence.
You've probably heard this quote before, right? The unexamined life is not worth living. It's a cornerstone of Western thought, but the story of how Socrates came to live and, spoiler alert, die by this very principle, well, that's where the real drama is.
So, to really get why Athens would put its most famous philosopher on trial for his life, you have to understand the city itself. This wasn't the Athens you might picture from its golden age. No, this was a city that was deeply, deeply scarred. It was a democracy still reeling from a humiliating military defeat and haunted by the recent, brutal rule of a regime called the 30 Tyrants. The whole city was on a knife's edge.
So into this incredibly tense political climate, you have Socrates. He's this well-known public figure, and what's he doing? He's wandering around, relentlessly questioning the most prominent citizens about whether they really know what they're talking about. As you can imagine, this didn't just lead to a few awkward conversations. It made him some very powerful and very resentful enemies.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start with the whole situation in Athens, then we'll look at the actual charges against Socrates, dive into his pretty unique defense, and then of course unpack the verdict and why it still matters so much today.
All right, so first up, the slander versus the indictment. In his defense, Socrates does something really clever. He argues that he's not just up against the guys prosecuting him in the courtroom. No, he says he's fighting a much older and way more dangerous enemy, the slander that has poisoned public opinion against him for years.
And this is where Socrates makes his brilliant distinction. He says, look, the real threat here isn't the formal indictment. The real poison is the years and years of rumors, the whispers that he's some kind of tricky sophist who can make a bad argument sound good. In his mind, that was way more dangerous than any official charge of corrupting the youth or impiety.
So, instead of doing what you'd expect in a legal defense, pleading for mercy or pointing out loopholes, Socrates completely reframes his entire life's work. He basically argues that he's not a criminal at all. He's a man on a divine mission.
And he tells this incredible story to back it up. It all starts with the oracle at Delphi, which famously claimed that no one was wiser than him. Now Socrates, who believed he knew nothing, was baffled. So he developed his famous method. He started questioning all the so-called experts. He wasn't trying to be a jerk. He saw it as a divine quest to figure out this riddle. But when you go around proving powerful people don't know what they think they know, well, you're going to make enemies.
And then Socrates gives us this absolutely brilliant analogy. He calls himself a gadfly, like one of those annoying flies that buzzes around a horse. He says Athens is this big, noble, but kind of lazy horse, and he, the gadfly, was a divine gift sent to sting it, to wake it up and get it moving toward virtue. What a way to frame your life's work, right? So here it is, the absolute crux of the issue. The jury pretty much offers him a choice. Stop philosophizing, be quiet, and you can live. And Socrates makes his stance crystal clear. He says he has an unwavering loyalty to his philosophical duty, and he puts that mission from God above everything, above the state, above the jury, and even above his own life.
This is just a radical decision, and it forces everyone, the jury back then and us right now, to face the core of his entire argument head on. Is a life without constant questioning, without self-examination, really a life worth living at all? He says no.
So after all that, he's convicted. It was a pretty close vote, actually. And then he's asked to propose his own punishment. What happens next is one of the most defiant and frankly shocking moments in the whole speech. Instead of suggesting, a fine or maybe being exiled, Socrates argues that since he's been a benefactor to the city, he deserves a reward, not a punishment. He proposes free meals for life at the Prytaneum, an honor reserved for Olympic heroes. You can just imagine how that went over with the jury. It was a move that absolutely sealed his fate.
And this is just perfect Socratic consistency, right to the very end. He spent his entire life admitting he didn't know things, so why would death be any different? He flat out refuses to fear something he doesn't have knowledge about. He argues it could be a peaceful, dreamless sleep, or it could be a fantastic journey. This kind of intellectual honesty, especially when you're facing your own death, is the ultimate expression of his philosophy.
Even though Athens managed to silence the man, his trial and death, which thankfully were documented by his brilliant student Plato, had the complete opposite effect on his ideas. They became immortalized. He set a whole new standard for what it means to have intellectual and moral integrity.
And you can literally trace a direct line from this single moment through the rest of Western philosophy. Socrates' example becomes this foundational story, right? It gets passed down through his student Plato, who starts the famous academy. Then it goes to his student Aristotle, and it just keeps going, shaping how we think about everything from personal ethics to civil disobedience.
Now, this is a really important thing to remember. The title, The Apology, is a bit misleading for us today. The original Greek word apologia doesn't mean saying you're sorry. It means a defense. Socrates wasn't apologizing for a single thing. He was making a powerful, unapologetic case that his way of life, a life of questioning, wasn't just harmless, it was absolutely vital for the health of the city.
And that's what Plato's Apology really leaves us with, this provocative, timeless question. It challenges us to think about the value of dissent, about the role of critics in society. Is a society that can't tolerate its own gadflies, is it truly free? That's a question that's just as urgent today as it was in ancient Athens.
This is for entertainment and educational purposes only.